Hi, this is Nick from Soul Contract Tarot, and today I just wanted to do a little audio, almost like an audio book kind of reading of a Instagram post that morphed into an essay that is now up on my blog. So if you're someone that prefers reading as opposed to listening, you can read this up on my blog. I'm going to link it below. Otherwise, just do what you do, and you can just listen to the audio. Okay. On having a physical body, coming into attention, and the Queen of Pentacles. Your human assignment is your single most important piece of spiritual work right now, or you wouldn't be doing it. Jessie Susannah, aka the Money Witch. I consider humans to have a few different types of bodies. We have the emotional body, the spiritual body, the mental body, and the physical body. So for the purpose of this recording, when I reference the body or body, I'm speaking on the physical body. A few weeks ago, I wrote an Instagram post with the title, I have a physical body, a fact that all of us on this earth having a human experience can relate to. We all have a fleshy, organ-filled, blood-abundant body, but declaring this fact felt incredibly important. Sometimes the mundane aspects of life as a human person can pass us by because it's normal to have a body. It's normal to see other bodies walking, rolling, moving around. It seems that for a lot of us, the only time we really acknowledge our human body is when it's in pain. In an effort to be more present with my body, I've been looking at the times where I am present, which is usually when I'm in pain and or triggered, and looking at the times when I'm not present, and that's usually when I'm dissociated, which can actually be a lot of the time. It was just over 2 years ago during my Saturn return that I really understood that I have a physical body. Maybe that seems silly. Like, how could I not understand this very clear fact? I have a body. I could just look in the mirror, right? I could just look down and feel my flesh, right? I think we often take for granted our day-to-day realities and don't have an analysis of our bodily experience simply because it always has been, and for the most part, always will be. Looking at our bodies through a lens of discovery and curiosity, or pain, shame, and rage, often only comes when we are existing in the world as someone outside of the normalized white, cis, het, thin, non-disabled body. In other words, we might be more familiar with looking at the body when we are queer, fat, trans, disabled, BIPOC, and the intersections thereof. In 2016, my body began talking to me through the language of extreme pain. And this isn't to say that I haven't had body pain in my lifetime. I have. I've had an organ fail on me to the point of removal. That was a gallbladder. I can't remember what the gallbladder surgery is called. I've experienced the ugly discomfort of inflammation. I've had the standard pains in my body that most people have at some point in their life, but I've never had something chronically prevent me from moving in the ways that I'm used to. I've never had pain morph into extreme agitation. It was during my Saturn return that I was put face to face with my body and the ways I neglected listening to my body. I'll also mention that my natal Saturn sits in my 6th house of daily ritual and health. I'll also mention that I'm a survivor of childhood sexual trauma, emotional neglect. I'm queer, non-binary trans, and I grew up fat, and I still am fat. My experience of having a body has been complex, and for a very long time I was living from the mid-throat and up. This is a common trait of survivors of trauma. We dissociate from our bodies because we learned that being in the physical body was a place where violence happens. For some of us, it feels dangerous to live in a body, and thus, depending on a person's experience with trauma, we might spend most of our time dissociated without even knowing it. Since I've spent most of my life with my body as other, in the last few years I've had to coach myself to remember, this is yours. This body belongs to you. I wonder how many times I've spent wishing I could be dissolved of this body, pulling, cutting, withholding, harming the physical form to punish it for being ugly and wrong. I can flash back to moments where the desire to be without a body was so much stronger than the desire to stay. So many of us have this experience of living dissociated from the physical self. When we experience trauma, whether it's physical or emotional, when we have chronic pain and grief, when we have certain experiences as trans and gender nonconforming people, when race, disability, size intersect, it can be so much safer to be out of the body. It's interesting and confusing how I can live so dissociated from my body while also acknowledging and remaining conscious of whiteness, being fat, and being trans. I can name those things and understand their intersections and still have lived so long unable and unwilling to listen to anything my body has to say. I've found that talking about the physical body is very nuanced and a controversial topic, yet I feel such a deep need to speak on it. There are so many different ranges of experience: chronic illness, disability, subtle pains, dysphoria, systemic violence. It would be unreal for me to try and talk about all those things as I don't have the experience with half of them. But what I do know is that it's painful to be in a body. And at the same time, it's just as painful to live outside of it, even as a means of survival. Dissociation seems to be spoken about in terms of separation from the mental body, but we have to remember that dissociation is separation from the mental and physical body. In this coping mechanism, we might continue perpetuating our hypervigilance and survival mode to the point where we are quote unquote living completely outside of ourselves. In this state, we are most likely unable to hear what the emotional body is saying. And the emotional body might be saying things like, I'm frightened, I'm holding too much, care for me, am I safe? I don't want to. This is when the physical body really starts to talk. I think that when we decide that we want to approach our bodies in order to come back home to ourselves, we have to do it incredibly slow. I also think that we have to remember that we can't force this reintegration of an embodied self. One of the roadblocks I've come across is not knowing where or how to access tools to safely integrate back. My intuitive sense from starting to allow my body to be heard seems to be about acknowledging that my unique body is here on this earth. Like really acknowledging that I'm here right now and just saying that like as it's a fact. I'm here right now. This is my body in this space, which is this 3D reality. Then going incredibly slow. And I think for some of us that's actually the super hard part is the going slow. Like you can't just snap your fingers and then all of a sudden you've been reintegrated into this, vessel that you have been dissociated from for such a long time. Also having support and knowing that it is hard to ask for support, and this is something that I struggle with so much, especially when it comes to the physical body, where we have been made to feel shame about the body that we incarnated into. But I think something that is also incredibly important is honoring my experience of trauma, honoring the trauma experience, and also honoring the experience of reclamation. Like, this is an incredible thing to decide, I want to reclaim my body. We see this when we reclaim words, like I'll just use the word queer as an example, how we've reclaimed the word queer from it being a slur, and maybe some people still view it as a slur, but for a lot of queers, it has become this reclamation, and there needs to be like honoring in that, because the people that queer had been used against in violence, they suffered under that word. And now we can just use it freely without thinking about it. So we need to honor that there was a reclamation that happened. This is a conscious choice. Also remembering that there doesn't have to be a goal, like I'll love my body or I think my body is beautiful. Like that is just far off. That doesn't have to be the thing in order to be here right now. We must approach ourselves with incredible compassion and patience. And these are both aspects that might be a struggle in themselves. An issue with spiritual communities that I was caught up in for a really long time was this idea that in order to be intuitive, psychic, clair, insert ability here, like clairvoyant, clairaudient, etc., meant disregarding the somatic experience to focus on being out of body. And I'm a huge fan of dreaming. In fact, I get a lot of my messages through dreaming, and astral traveling can be interesting and fun and like this like total mind warp, but it also can become a trap to avoid the incarnate experience that's happening. One does not have to be out of body to be an incredible channel. One does not have to be out of body to be psychic. One does not have to be out of body to be united with spirit. And I think that's the thing that is left out of a lot of discussion with these like new age kind of like communities. I'm using the word community incredibly lightly because and I find that with this idea of like coming back into the body, that tarot offers me the ability to reframe old stories I've told myself about my body through use of visual interpretation. Most, if not all, the decks I have humans on them. And it's a whole other thing to speak on the lack of representation in certain decks. But for now, I'll just say that tarot does bridge the physical and the spiritual, reminding us that it is inherently spiritual to be human, and it's inherently human to be spiritual. And so I just want to talk about the Queen of Pentacles. When the Queen of Pentacles comes forward, we are being invited to investigate the tactile human form with curiosity and interest. The Queen of Pentacles, the Earth suit, is curious about growth and the slowness of embodiment. She knows that to be a human person, and I say she just for consistency, but queens, all the court cards, this is not gender. There is an essence, but I'm just going to be using the pronoun she for right now. The queen knows that to be a human person, we hold many intricacies of pain and joy. And that to feel into being a grounded person takes a lot of patience, compassion, and sitting in a space of discomfort. In client sessions, I'm really fond of garden metaphors. Like, there's nothing quite as accurate to the human experience as a garden. And I say that as someone who's not particularly called to garden. In most imagery of the Queen of Pentacles, we see her sitting amongst the fruit of her patience, the flourished garden. We meet the Queen after she spent months of time tending to regenerating soil, overturning the compost, planting seeds, weeding, watering, protecting from birds and small animals, a commitment of effort to see the garden become bountiful. And what the Queen is showing us is that it is not instant magic that plants grow from small seeds into strong vines that climb up the garden wall, or big juicy pumpkins, round and sweet for roasting. This is slow brew magic, which is the type of magic we really need to engage with if we're wanting to come back into our bodies. It would be too much of a jolt, possibly re-traumatizing, to urgently try to reconnect with our body. It might even say to the fragmented self, your reasonings for dissociating are bullshit. I want back in now. This is the opposite of the compassion that we need in order to explore integration. This is why the garden metaphor is so potent for any type of healing, really, but especially physical body integration. Slowness is the compassion that allows trust to form organically. And what we need is that the fragmented aspects of ourselves that have caused us to go into spaces of dissociation from the body, the physical body, need the trust to form. Sciatic pain was so intense I couldn't sit. I often would find myself on the floor, rocking back and forth on my knees, crying. My lower back was just screaming at me. And at the time, I worked a 9 to 6, 5 days a week call center job where I was not just like answering questions in this like inbound call center, but I was scheduling people and doing intake for abortions and other stigmatized types of appointments. So I was holding a lot emotionally as well. I don't know exactly what it was that caused my lower back to spasm, for the disc to pop out and thus press on my sciatic nerve. Maybe it was the amount of emotional space I didn't realize that I was holding. Maybe it was sitting so many hours a day. Maybe it was from living with my parents in my childhood home as a 28-year-old. And honestly, at this point, I've dug so deep into trying to figure out the why, but it doesn't matter what it was. What matters is that this was the catalyst that allowed me to start paying attention to my body. One of the most important things I've learned in working with trauma is that acknowledgement is a major factor in the healing process. As it is a process of many roller coaster years, one of the greatest things we can do for the aspects of self that are really intertwined with pain is to acknowledge that the pain exists and that it is valid that we feel uncomfortable, agitated, or upset. I think that's why the simple yet complex acknowledgement, I have a physical body, was so important for me. I had been moving in the world as if I didn't even have a body, or perhaps worse than that I had a body, but I didn't even care what happened to it. So much trauma had already been imprinted on this body. So what if anything else happens? This is no longer my mindset, but it wasn't long ago when it was. Like the Queen of Pentacles, I'm curious on what it means to be grounded. I want to remain curious. I'm curious on what it means to sit with my body when it starts talking instead of running away or even running to try and fix it. There have been moments where I run to my yoga mat to stretch out the pain collecting in my lower back, but practicing subtle patience before taking action is giving me deeper insight into what the pain in my lower back is actually radiating. In quote unquote spiritual communities, I hear and see a lot of emphasis put on exploring spirit through energetic concepts that don't necessarily include the body. And I find that this lens neglects the physical body for what it is: a perfect spiritual tool, a completely gorgeous vessel. When we channel spirit, it's through our human body. When we meditate, we are becoming present not just in the mind, the human mind, but into this third dimensional body. The quote that I used at the beginning by Jessie Susannah, Money Witch, really encapsulates this. Your human assignment is your single most important piece of spiritual work right now, or you wouldn't be doing it. If our lens wasn't supposed to be through this 3D human form, we would have just incarnated differently. The universe is so expansive that we had so many different perspectives to choose from, and we chose human. It's important for me to remind myself that this is my human body. This is my physical body, because my body is my literal vessel to contain any and all spiritual, emotional, and mental growth. Without my body, I lose the valuable perspective of what it means to have a body. I'm slowly learning, like the Queen of Pentacles, to integrate small lessons into the physical form, to listen and hold valid the ways my body talks to me, whether it's in pain or not. I want to debunk this weird myth that in order to be spiritual or psychic or intuitive, one must be out of body, when really our human bodies hold such ancient wisdom from our personal ancestors and our collective ancestors. Our body doesn't forget. Our body serves a purpose as a manifestation of magic, and I'm slowly realizing it is my greatest, most powerful tool. Thanks for listening. If you are into this, like this video, subscribe, leave a comment, share it. And I really hope that you treat yourself with compassion, or start to acknowledge that maybe one day you want to be able to treat yourself with compassion. I hope you have a beautiful day. See you next time.